please join me in welcoming to the stage Kara Loughran, the director, and Helen Lee, the subject of this documentary. Thank you so much for joining us, Kara and Helen. It is such a pleasure having you here after watching this monumental and inspiring work that you've made before us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for coming on this crazy night in Ontario today. We really appreciate it. It's nice to be here from just a little ways east from here.
We're so lucky to have you. So I do want to start off by talking about how this documentary is quite intergenerational. You start off immediately with the future generation. You start off with your kids, but then you also take back to your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. It's really an exploration of that, and you both are acting as the bridge between those generations and preserving this culture for the future. So how does it feel being that bridge, both as filmmakers and also as in your generation, in bridging the past and the future?
I know for me, I connected with Helen actually kind of immediately as a granddaughter, because I could see how much your grandmother meant to you. And it had been quite a few years since my papa had passed. But there was sort of something in Helen's loss of her grandmother that touched something in me. And then in context of making the film, the other sort of thing that changed me a lot from when I'd last made my own sort of work that was sort of based on my own story was becoming a mother. And so I think that idea of 3 generations under one roof that, you know, I'd heard a lot about in context of immigrant family, but I hadn't experienced that myself. In meeting Helen, I connected to her on that level and saw that she actually had that experience in her in a different way than I did, and that became really foundational. In fact, like when we were editing the film, part of trying to figure out the framework, because it's such a big story, I found a lot of grounding in the relationship that we forged in the making of the film. When Helen's mother talks about her being a very good older sister, and we discovered that she became like my guide in some way to that relationship within a Chinese context.
How about for you, Helen?
Well, I'm Kira's daughter, right? I think with the separation of the seniors in the early days, my grandfather really cherished the time that he had with me. Like I said, he pushed the stroller when men would not push a stroller, right? So I was really blessed with spending time with him in a way that I think a lot of other families might not have had. And because of that, I was very close to him. And then when he passed away, I was 11, but we used to chew the fat all the time since I was like 8, right, kind of thing. And he introduced me to coffee, which he got him in a lot of trouble with my mother. But yeah, so then I was close to my grandmother. So it was just very natural for me. And I remember asking my grandmother, "Do you miss my grandfather now that he's passed away?" And she said, "Well, I don't know him that well," because they only had 12 years together, right? So I thought, wow, that was really weird as a kid, hearing that. And so naturally for me, as a mother too, I want to kind of preserve these experiences because my son he doesn't see them, right? And so the intergenerational thing is a very important thing for me, and I hope that it also resonates with other immigrant families. and to encourage them.
Yes, I think the concept of an intergenerational silence and you're working beyond the silence is really important and integral in this film. You mentioned working through the story in the editing stage, and you both worked in post-production together. So for this documentary has clear, like it has a first half and then it has the second half where you do go back and you explore that. You are free to talk more about that, but I do want to talk about how you structured the documentary and how that came together in the editing stage.
Sure. This is my first documentary. This is my first sort of like feature-length, full-story film piece, documentary or otherwise. I come from the theater, a long tradition in the theater. I worked for a long time at the Stratford Festival, but also my own work was mostly in new plays. And so structure is kind of hugely important to me, both as a playwright and as a director. And we actually played with a 4-part Chinese structure, the 4-line poetry, that because I started to discover that this was a structure that I gravitated towards, and it was a different way, slightly different. It maps onto the sort of traditional hero's journey, but it's a 4-part structure where the first is the introductions, and then it goes into development, and the third part is the twist. And it's actually come to North America through like Japanese anime style. In Japanese, it's called Kisho Tenketsu, and the third part is like this twist where something, like it's just completely different. So for me, and then the fourth part is the resolution. But in the contrast of that third part is how rather than sort of reaching a climax in plot, it creates a different tension, and the goal is that the resolution in the fourth just expands your world, your understanding of the world. So it lends a new perspective to the beginning, to where you think you're going in the beginning. So for me, that it actually, it feels like 2 parts. It's actually 4. The fourth part's quite short, but and I had to fight kind of hard because I was playing with it in the middle. Like I'm not an expert in this, so I had to sort of lean on my dramaturgical experimentations within the editing through the material. We also had 2 different editors working on the piece. Jonathan Baltrusiadis started us off and was very generous in terms of like dealing with a first-time filmmaker, but I kind of knew that editing would be, I was like, I don't know how to make the film without being involved, like highly involved in the editing process myself. And then the way that we shot it was actually, I teach devised theater at York University, so which is about making plays. My own experience of it comes from community play building often, and physical theater, so image-based and collective kind of work. And the process of that, so we kind of applied those kinds of making skills or generating the material in that way and just filmed everything. And so the editing process was a lot of like review, and also sometimes like I knew what happened from being in it, but I didn't know what what Iris had actually captured because I wasn't necessarily always on the monitor. And so we'd had, again, sort of following theater practices, had artistic conversations beforehand. And then the directorial thing was like, well, I know we have to shoot here, and I know I want to shoot this person, or I know we want to do shoot this kind of situation, but we didn't script any of it. And then we had to get everything transcribed, and then I would sort of pour over the transcript. So there was sort of like the micro and the macro going on at the same time. And I think John got a bit stuck, and we sort of ran out of time a bit within his pass of it. And the China. Richard Lee came on to go through the China material because he's also a descendant and sort of had a different eye and is a longtime theater collaborator of mine. So he kind of did a pass at the China footage itself. And then John kind of got a bit stuck in that middle, the second part, the montage, which was all around the family redress and Helen's story, the difference between my family history and Helen's family history. And he had other work to have to get back to. We found our final editor, Sarah Petty, who really related to the material as a woman and really understood, I think, the structure I was going for and the pace. And so she did the final edit off of, I mean, she looked at all of the footage, bless her, herself. She looked at Richard's Pass of China, and then I think in the end she looked at where John had landed. And so the film really is a mix of all four of us. I was very hands-on with John, you know, for better or for worse, to sort of try to land the original. But it was interesting because it was sort of like the creative team, and having footage that you could sort of change and scripts that you could edit was new for me and kind of exciting. But that's like on a real nuts and bolts level. That's how it was for me.
Yeah, that is so interesting that you're born from your theater experience and the hero's journey, except the hero is yourself and you're kind of living that journey as well. That is it is reflected in how intricate the documentary is. And Helen, for you also, when you are looking at that footage, reflecting back on it, going through the cutting process, how did that make you view your journey?
Mine was not as technical as Kira's because we kind of complement each other in very different ways, right? And so like when I said in the film that it was appointed, I really believe that this is an appointed film, and I really believe that through time people came in and out bringing their expertise, and you know the spoken word, the music, the beautiful photography of it, it all got put together. Just like when we were at the cemetery and all of a sudden we were like, it's the same place, are you kidding me? I went through the mountains, she went through the farm, and we ended up in the same place, right? So for me, it is a step of faith, a leap of faith, and the film will be whatever it is, but the purpose of the film is to really inspire and do a lot of good for families, for communities, and I really think that it will do that. And it'll do that in a really weird way that we could never kind of compose ourselves, but it will just happen, right? Just even the photos that were picked. Some of the people that picked those photos didn't really know the backstory to those photos, but there is a backstory to it. And when those people see their photos there, they're like, wow.
If I may just interject as well, like Helen, I was invited to write and direct this film when we had no money. It was Craig had heard about Foon Hae Lum's story, and then I met Helen through like that introduction. And as the writer and director of it, the trust of that Helen gave to the project, and then the process, we had just sort of carve our own of just going back and going, okay, so Helen, here's how we're pitching, like, I want it to be like the two of us, the two granddaughters coming, like chasing the story of our grandmothers, and then Helen was brilliant for two reasons in the editing thing. First is she can speak Chinese, so she could understand the footage better than I could for all of the stuff in China. But then I also had to make sure that she was okay with with where we'd landed after she gave me the space to muck around and figure it out. And one of the challenges was at a certain point, everyone kept going like, "Oh, your grandmother's story is so fascinating," and I was like, "My grandmother's had lots of stuff written about her, and not unduly, but like it's the parallel of the two and the need to sort of see both women as like iconic of their generation and very different in their experience, because between their two lives, you can see the diversity of qualities in these women of their generation that is inspiring, and Helen just through her continued generosity and then participation to kind of go, no, actually it's this, or actually like, what about this? So then we would, because like there's an accountability there, and so while she wasn't in the technical editing room, this, that, and the other thing, I think it's a really important co-creation kind of model that we landed on to be able to ensure agency of story in the balance while making a thing of art.
And coming back to the stories of your grandmothers, because that's really where it starts from, you both are carrying that torch forward, and they were trailblazers in their own right, and you're carrying that forward. What does that mean to you to continue showcasing and shining light on what they did? Helen?
Yeah, when my grandmother died, the reporters asked me, "Are you gonna pick up her mantle and and be, socially active?" And I used to be before, right? I had my son, and I wasn't sure about that, But then once the film was made and it went across Canada, people saw it, and the younger generation, it really, I saw our seniors, the men, with tears in their eyes at the theater, right? And I saw young children and teenagers too come to me and say, "Wow, you did that? That's incredible. I think I'm going to go back and find this uncle that I heard about and talk to him," Said, "Yeah, get their stories." And then they said, "Well, what do I do after I get the story?" I said, "Write it down, do whatever you would like, write a poem, a story, a drawing, a film, whatever you feel like you'd like to do to reflect your family history." And then they said, "Well, what do I do after that?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe this film will inspire a whole bunch of new creations from the younger generation, and we could do an exhibit, who knows, right?" But yeah, so I do have I feel like I'm more pulled in than I thought I would at the beginning. I thought this would be the end, but actually this is like an entrance into another stage of my life.
How about you, Kara?
I'm not the only one who carries the story anymore. So what it felt like, so my Aunt Arlene, who's in the film, has always sort of been our family knowledge keeper. But actually what was really moving to me in the process was, it was also the first time I'd worked officially with a researcher. And one of our primary researcher, Juan Bello, actually is from London and teaches at Western. And he's the one who found, because he's an amazing researcher, he was the one who found the video footage of my grandmother that I'd never seen before. And in hearing her, I have a very specific experiences of my grandmother as her grandchild, seeing I knew she'd done these interviews and stuff, but I hadn't seen them, and he pulled these beautiful things. The thing that stuck with me the most was when she talks at the end about that you don't have to be a somebody to be a somebody. And what I saw for the first time, I'd sort of, my grandma got the Order of Canada, and then by the end of the film, I was like, oh no, my grandma was just was called upon by the community to fill in a role and responsibility for something that the community needed, and she did it, and she did it possibly despite her own feelings around stuff too, because in terms of my grandfather's first wife and coming out, I don't know how all of that went down. And so it made me look, I guess, at how do you carry the torch? I think you can only do what you do. And then what I feel like also is that it's changed my, in theater, right? You do a play, you work really, really hard on it, it goes up, it closes, and it's a very ephemeral thing. If you weren't in the house, if you didn't see the show, it's gone. And sometimes you're lucky enough to meet people later who saw it and were moved by it. It inspired them to do their own thing. But in film, it continues to exist, and it becomes a thing that can be the beginning of. And so I've started to experience that since the film had its premiere. And I've been working hard to actually get it into schools and get it into curriculum. So there's been people from the community again who have seen it and have offered to help co-write these study guides and stuff like that. So it's made me sort of capable of participating in a different kind of legacy or carrying it on. It's hard work, and it's not work that you necessarily need to do as an artist, but it feels appropriate to do. It feels like a responsibility, and it allows me to continue to learn about how these kinds of things can have greater ripples. And so that's been pretty satisfying, challenging but satisfying as well.
Thank you for sharing your story. That is all the time we have for today. But a reminder that this film does qualify for the Old Oak Audience Choice Award and the Fan Favorite Award. So please use your ballots on the way out, drop them in the ballot box. Once again, thank you for joining us. It was such a pleasure having you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the audience.